Welcome back to Your Day in Court on Extra 106.3 with renowned lawyers Bruce Hagen and Ray Giudice, two of the kindest and most thoughtful people that you'll ever meet, and expertise that is unparalleled and unmatched. And I was just curious, when people are deciding, when you're deciding to be a lawyer, when does that happen? When you're 8, when you're 18, when you're 20? Walk me through that process and how you get to being where you are, Bruce.
Well, for me, it's kind of interesting. So my dad was a criminal lawyer in the Bronx, New York. He was a real street lawyer, never had an office, never went to the office. He was in court every day. And he also was living a pretty modest life. And so he was there for everything, my childhood. He was at every football game, basketball game, baseball game, every practice, you name it. He was there for all of it. So I was always intrigued by it. But personally, for me, I did not want to be a lawyer. I had every intention of playing professional football, and that was going to be my career. No one told me that there's not much of a calling for 5'9" Jewish kids from New York to play in the NFL. And so I made it as far as playing 1 year of college football at University of Florida, and then realized that I had to try something else because clearly this was not going to be my future. So that's when I kind of turned my attention towards being a lawyer. And found that it was actually a very natural thing for me to do. At that point, I realized, I've spent my entire childhood being cross-examined. I know how to do this, and so it was a pretty cool and clear path for me. And I'll get more into it after Ray, sort of goes into how he got started. But what brought this up is I had a high school classmate who went to law school with Ray. His name is John Halvey. He lives down in Florida, and I got to see him this past week. And John thought it would be interesting for us to talk about kind of how Ray and I each ended up with the careers that we had, because we both took a non-traditional approach, I think, as guys that started out on our own at a very young age and kind of crafted practices for ourselves. Whereas I look at John as he is the absolute model of what everybody that went to law school, certainly in the late 80s, mid 80s, wanted to do, which is you wanted to be at the top of your class, which John was, and you wanted to be an editor of the Law Review. You wanted to get the great job at the prestigious New York law firm, and then given an opportunity to work there and become a partner there. And that's the career path that he took, which I find to be just amazing. It's something that I know I never could have done. It was not right for me. I kind of figured that on early in my academic career, and then certainly in my work career. Ray can explain, but I feel like he's probably in the same boat because we just weren't cut out for that sort of thing. But I am just amazed at the folks who are, and certainly he's had a great career doing that, and then that led to other fantastic opportunities. So there's a lot of different ways to go about having a law career or a career in law. And Ray and I have just taken a similar but different approach to it that got us to become friends at an early stage and has had us orbiting in the same circles and brought us together here for this show.
Yeah, it's been a circuitous route. I think the listeners may know by now that Bruce and I grew up minutes away from each other on the cross-county parkway, probably 15, 20 minutes apart. So I didn't have that in high school. I took a lot of summer school and did a lot of detention in high school, which led me to being qualified to go to Orange County Community College in Middletown, New York. And on a lark visiting a friend in Atlanta one spring, I wound up at Emory College, where they accepted me on the spot, I think because I had some kind of a grant that would pay tuition. Worked for 2 years after graduating Emory in 1980 with the political science history degree, which qualifies you either to teach school, with nothing wrong with that, or go to law school. I actually took 2 years off and worked at the Old DeKalb Farmers Market on Medlock and Scott Boulevard in Decatur for Robert and Harry Blazers. Great guys. They worked me hard. They paid me well. And I met the person who was the dean of admissions at Emory Law. Her name was Jane DeFalco. And every Friday afternoon, Ms. DeFalco would come to the farmers market where I was slicing the prosciutto and the cheeses because I was Italian, so that's where they put me. And one day she said to me, "What are you doing working here? You graduated college. What do you want to do?" I said, "Well, I've been thinking about going to law school." And she handed me her business card, and she was the director of admissions at Emory Law School. And about 60 days later, I was in the orientation where the famous lines are, "Look to your right, look to your left. One of these three aren't going to be here in a year."
Wow.
And that's kind of how that part got started. Sometimes late at night after 3 or 4 Johnny Walkers, I close my eyes and I say, what? You know, as your heroes, the Grateful Dead, said, Bruce, what a long, strange trip it's been.
And I started out of law school and thought I wanted to live and work in New York for one of those big firms. Those New York firms had a different plan for me that involved about 130 rejection letters. But as it turned out, I got a great job in Atlanta with a mid-sized firm. And I spent about 4 years at that firm doing construction litigation cases. And so I was looking over contracts and reviewing documents involving huge disputes between general contractors and owners of projects. Just to give you an idea, we had a power plant that was one of our clients. So you had, multiple $1 million and $100 million contracts to build a power plant that we were reviewing, and litigation all throughout. If they built a stack at a power plant that was 50 feet high, they had a stack of documents that was 100 feet high to try to justify all the work that went into that. And so, I spent 2 years just kind of digging through documents and papers at this firm. And I thought, that was an area of law that interested me, but it never got me into courtroom. And that's really what I wanted to do. I left that firm after about 4 years, went to another firm briefly doing commercial litigation, like in the bankruptcy context. I didn't like it there. They didn't like me very much there. I really should have gone out on my own before I went to that firm, but I didn't think I was ready. And then in February 1992, it was 30 years ago, I just decided I'm launching my own practice. I had no money. Well, that's not entirely true. I had about $150. I had a lot of debt. I had a computer that I didn't know how to use that had been made obsolete when the 286 computer was launched on the marketplace. So one of the legal secretaries showed me how to create a document, and I spent about a day figuring that stuff out. And then, opened up my own shop and immediately started saying, I will take whatever it is that you need. That is my new expertise. I had one client that followed me, and it was a construction matter, and I started doing their litigation. And gradually, I scraped and I clawed and I did a little of this and a little of that. And I went door to door to all the lawyers that I knew, telling them I was in the refuse business, that if there was something they didn't want to do, I was willing to do it. And I took every case that came along, and I took them all to trial, and that was kind of my thing. Is like, okay, I've been a lawyer for 6 years, but hadn't been in a single trial. And within that first year, I was trying cases pretty much every month, and continued at that pace, if not faster, for years, because I was going to make up for my lack of formal experience by getting actual courtroom experience just doing it. And that's exactly what I did. And, 200 trials or so later, here we are, having seen just about everything under the sun. Probably about 4 years into my practice, I got my first personal injury claim and realized that this was something that I really enjoyed doing, partly because I like taking care of people. I liked representing people over companies. And I didn't have to worry about whether somebody could afford to hire me if they had the ability to pay a retainer or an hourly rate or a flat fee. I was just going to get paid on a percentage of whatever we could get if and when there was a recovery. And I was willing to bet on myself in that context that, okay, if I put this time in and don't get paid, that's fine, but I think I will. And eventually, that became the only thing I did as I started turning down all other types of cases. For any lawyer that might be out there that is starting a practice or has a new practice, turning down work that you don't want to do is probably one of the most powerful things you can do to stay on target and build your practice the right way for you.
Both of you guys have done some pretty extraordinary things leading up to where you are these days. And I want to talk about both of them because, Bruce, you played at the University of Florida, played football. Most people don't know that. I didn't know that. And as we lead into the Super Bowl, I think it would be something great to kind of tell that story too, just, because this is the South. This is college football. I mean, there's nothing people love more than that. And then when we finish that, I want to get to Ray, and you were on national television on a show with Nancy Grace, and I want to get how all that kind of came together. And you can even see some of that on Ray's website. But we'll start, Bruce. You went down and played at the University of Florida. You're an old Gator.
I'm an old Gator, that's for sure. And I was a welcomed, invited walk-on in those days, which meant that my parents sort of threw me out of the car and dumped me off at the football stadium about a month before school started. And I walked in there, and we got to work out with the team, practice. I was telling somebody a story the other day because the Bengals are in the Super Bowl. And at the time that I was there, I really was a natural defensive back, but they had enough of those, so they put me at receiver. And they called the walk-ons like me, we were called Gator bait because they needed something to feed to the players.
That's right.
And that was us. So I spent that whole first week there where it was just all the freshmen that were coming in and the walk-ons before the rest of the players got there, because they wanted to really sort of introduce you to the system. And all I kept hearing from the receivers coaches, you got to work hard. You got to be like Cadillac. You got to run your routes like Cadillac. You got to, bust your butt in the weight room like Cadillac. I'm like, who is this Cadillac they're talking about?
Who is this guy?
Right. So then the players show up, and it turns out that Cadillac was Chris Collinsworth, who was an All-American receiver at Florida. And he was Mr. Everything. And I'm on the line, sort of getting my food for lunch or dinner, whatever it was. And here's this guy, and he's, 6'4", blonde hair, just skinny as a rail, even though he could bench 300. And was probably the fastest thing in the state of Florida at that time. And I said, wait a second, you're Cadillac? I'm supposed to do everything you do. And I took all the food off my tray and just took exactly what he had and put that on my tray. And so he sat down with me and proceeded to talk to me and hear my story and give me the whole "all shucks" bit. When I was telling him that how great the coaches were saying he was, and just the nicest guy in the world. And so then he ended up getting drafted a couple years later by the Bengals, and I became a Bengals fan loosely because of Chris Collinsworth, who, despite what people may think of him as a broadcaster, I understand he is a little obnoxious at times. Just couldn't have been a nicer human being and someone who took the time, even though he was a college All-American and really the big man on campus, to just sit here and sort of talk to this nobody from New York who was there, ostensibly to make him work hard and practice, and become a friend with that person. So that was really special, I thought. But it was clear that after a year of playing football there, that was not my future. The level of commitment that they were looking for was way more than I was able to give. And so it was right about midway through my freshman year that I realized I may have to start thinking about something involving academics because the sports thing is not going to be my future.
Most of us do.
Yeah, and so I was just maybe a little bit late to that game. And so that led to law school, and, for the rest is history.
There you go. And Ray, you've done some pretty extraordinary things in your career as well. Being on national TV, that's an old hat.
Well, it's another one of those things, a bolt of lightning struck. When I was a young prosecutor back in 85 and 86, I met another young prosecutor. Her name is Nancy Grace, and Nancy was in the district attorney's office in Fulton County. I was in DeKalb, and through a mutual friend, we went out for, I think, cocktails maybe once or twice and stayed very good friends. During the OJ trial, Nancy was on local TV, and she took a swipe at Johnny Cochran, who somehow saw it, and that created the Cochran and Grace show on Court TV. Sadly, Johnny Cochran, and regardless of what some people think about him, he was a fantastic jury trial lawyer. Miss Cochran got very ill and passed away shortly after the start of the show, and Nancy was up in New York doing Court TV, affiliated with, at the time, CNN. And I started going up there a couple times a year, maybe a little bit more, and doing her Court TV show. And then CNN relocated Court TV down here to then the Phillips Arena, CNN Center. And I became a Tuesday night regular from 8 to 9 with Nancy yelling at me and telling the producers to shut off his mic and throwing things at me. And then we'd crack up during the break. And the producers before the show would say, okay, Ray, we just need you to make sure that we don't get sued when Nancy alleges everybody committed X, Y, and Z crime right out of the shoot. So that's why I'm trained to start off with that presumption of innocence, burden of proof on every single case I comment on, because that was kind of my job. And so that was a lot of fun. They were long days, but I got used to getting there around 6:30, and they'd have a little meeting and give us the stories. And I got makeup put on and learned how to not wear a certain kind of tie. That this is before high definition, because the cameras would make the tie wave, back and forth. So I learned a lot about it. After the show, I would always say, "How did it go?" And she'd go, "Oh, relax, it's just television." We go for a drink. Yeah. But that led to that led to a lot of other things. I was on CBS 46 a lot with Stephanie Fisher, early mornings, Dave FM with Jimmy Barron. And then one night during the Michael Vick trial, in walks two local radio sports talk commentators, Sandra Golden and Steak Shapiro, and they were going to comment from that angle on Mr. Vick's process and trial. And after the show, Steak Shapiro and Sandra and I went out to the Palm in Buckhead. And after a few libations and some chit chat, we cut a deal on a Palm table napkin, contract for me to appear every Friday morning at 8:20 to talk about the latest athlete that got himself or herself in some trouble. And a few years later, after that programming stopped, I moved over to 680 The Fan, and have been happy to work with the great voices over there that, we have some different people at different times over the last 6 or 7 years. Yeah. But that's the nature of the business. And David Dickey has stuck with me through thick and thin, and some inappropriate comments. I try to keep them to a minimum.
Right. Which is a smart thing to do, probably.
Well, David wants you to think that he's not paying attention.
Right.
He's paying attention.
Right, exactly. That's it. That's the I think that's an entrepreneurial spirit right there, right?
Like all great businessmen, they know exactly how many containers of 2% milk are in that back corner of the supermarket at any given time.
That's right. And Bruce, you've been doing radio and media for a long time as well.
Oh yeah, particularly sports talk radio, and I got started a long time ago. Back also with 790 The Zone. Coming on in the afternoons. Typically, Ray would come on in the mornings. I would come on in the afternoons. And right when they had a show starting there called The Two Live Stews, I met with Ryan Stewart, and I thought, oh, this is just a perfect opportunity, and we hit it off great. And I became kind of a voice for The Two Live Stews, which is, if you remember the show, I mean, they were like, it was like hip hop sports talk radio.
Yeah, it was huge.
And it was great. And so I got with them right from the start, and then their show just blew up and took off like a rocket. But also like a rocket, it came crashing back to earth, and, kind of unceremoniously so. And so after the Two Live Stew show was no longer part of the station, I continued on in various capacities, and eventually came over to 680 as well, and have been a fixture with the Chuck and Chernoff show for years. We have a running gag where I give my talk on whatever the issues are in sports and the law, which there's always something. Ray and I are in such a great position because there's always some athlete somewhere doing something stupid that puts them in conflict with the law and gives us something to talk about, But inevitably, we get to a point in the show where I offer to give my opinion and analysis of some sports topic, and I get cut off, like right before.
Every time.
Every single segment ends with me getting cut off. And I have so many friends and listeners who's like, hey, why does that happen? I really wanted to hear what you were going to say about like the Braves bullpen rotation for the playoffs. I was interested in what you had to say. It's like, come on, man. I'm just a regular guy like anybody else who happens to have some insight onto the law. But when it comes to sports, I'm just like anybody else. Like, yeah, but so's everybody on that station.
That's right.
Yeah, that's true.
There's no experts in sports, really. I mean, maybe Alex Anthopoulos, the GM of the Braves, you call him an expert because the decisions he seems to make, are they always go to plan almost.
Getting back to like how the legal career and things get shaped, and Ray mentions like he just knew this. He worked with this young prosecutor who they were friends, and then so I mentioned having been on with the two I sues for many years. And back sometime around 2010 or 11, Ryan Stewart, who had played professional football for the Detroit Lions for 5 years or so, told me he had been contacted about this potential case against the NFL involving repeated blows to the head causing brain trauma that the NFL had lied about to its players. And some lawyer had contacted him from out in California, and did I think this was a real case? And from that, it led to me saying, well, yeah, I think it's a case. And yeah, I don't think you need a California lawyer. I could do this for you right here. And that one call and the willingness to say yes, the entrepreneurial bent that both Ray and I share that leads us to get into things that we're willing to take risks. That became sort of a turning point in my career in some respects, because it got me heavily involved in that NFL concussion litigation where we ended up, I say we because I had co-counsel my friend Mike McGlamory, who is more of a mass torts kind of lawyer and had been a quarterback at Wake Forest. We ended up with about 500 clients that were all former NFL players and on the leadership committees in the case that took down the NFL for their abuse of their players and years and years of lying to the players about the dangers and the risks that they were subjecting themselves to of long-term brain damage being caused by these repetitive blows to the head. So that was just one of those things that because I was in that position and going back to the early days of the career where I said I would take on any case that came along and try everything. And if you needed it, that was my new expertise. When the opportunity came, I said yes. And it became really just a great sort of career-changing opportunity for me. So I couldn't have anticipated that would have happened as I was graduating law school. It's just one of those things that kind of happened.